Okay, welcome to Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm Director of Product Marketing in our Cloud Business Unit at VMware. And today I'm joined by Gerrit, Robert, and John. So let's start with some introductions. Gerrit, do you want to go first?
Sure, thanks, Guy. Gerrit Lehr, Cloud Solution Strategist with the Worldwide Multi-Cloud Architecture and Strategy team.
And more from your team online at the moment. So Robert, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you very much. Robert Riemer, VMware, boom, there we go. Start from scratch. Robert Riemer, multi-cloud architect in the multi-cloud worldwide team.
Thank you, Robert. And John?
Yeah, thanks, Guy. John Maroney, I lead multi-cloud architecture globally for cloud sales.
Great, thanks, John. So it's lovely to have you and Gerrit back, and Robert, welcome. Thank you very much for your time today. And today we're going to have, I heard multi-cloud about 3 times there, so we're going to talk about multi-cloud, a little bit about kind of at a high level, what is available today, where is this evolving into, and then we're going to particularly dive in with HCX, with Robert being able to provide some overview of HCX, and we'll walk through a demo perhaps. Let's start with the overall kind of multi-cloud strategy has led to VMware having obviously our solution with AWS, but now solution with Microsoft on Azure, solution with Google, and the HCX glue in between. And we're seeing really an explosion of products in the area. Gerrit, why don't you just give us a kind of an overview on what does that actually look like today for a cloud provider?
Sure, Guy. So let's maybe start with what this looks like in general for our customers altogether, right? So as most of the listeners will remember, we started with VMware Cloud and AWS some 4 years ago. And now over time, this has evolved to the VMware SDDC stack really being available in any hyperscale cloud that's out there, right? So there is Azure VMware solution, there is Google Cloud VMware Engine, Oracle Cloud VMware solution. We have a solution in IBM that's been around for many years, as well as in Ali Cloud, right? So
yeah,
now we have the SDDC stack anywhere. And architecturally, they all are very similar, right? So it's vSphere, it's vSAN, it's NSX, and in almost all cases, there's HCX as the migration tool as an option on top of that. Now, when we look deeper into the details, there are a couple of differences between all those hyperscale solutions. For example, in regards to who owns and supports the environment, as well as the add-on solutions that are available. So VMware Cloud and AWS being the longest existing solution there, that's really owned and operated and supported by VMware, full end-to-end. And it's also available to our partners through the VMware MSP program, right? As well as the respective AWS programs as well. Now, that's one of the major differences and unique to VMC and AWS, because all the other solutions are really owned and operated by those respective partners like Microsoft, Google, Oracle, and so on, and are also available only through their partner programs, right? So there are some differences between those solutions, but the main advantage here for our cloud provider partners as well as our customers is that they get a similar stack in all of those cloud data centers out there. And for our partners, that means they can move to an asset-light strategy where they, move their business model to someone else's data center, for example, AWS, and provide services from there. Or they could even focus on managing the whole multi-cloud journey and environment for their customers all together. So providing services, whether that's professional or managed, between different clouds and including workload migrations with tools like HCX, for example.
Yeah, so you mentioned a load of good things there. So VMware Cloud and AWS, obviously our flagship kind of solution there with AWS. But when you are talking about Microsoft, Google, Alibaba, Oracle, all of the others, they are owned and operated by those entities and sold through those entities. So there may be a time when they're available for our MSP program for our cloud providers to transact with. But fundamentally, looking at it from a non kind of commercial agreement, it's really that single SDDC stack. And I think we're calling it an SDDC. It's a VCF, VMware Cloud Foundation stack now, right? And it may have some additional tuning in those environments that those companies have explicitly put on because it's their show, right? They can put on whatever they like. Whereas the VMware Cloud and AWS one is the VMware VCF kind of enterprise footprint. So possibly slightly different to the others in some very small ways. And the opportunity for cloud providers here, you mentioned asset light and switching to asset light and providing different services on that. What sort of, if you were having a conversation now with a cloud provider who's doing this on their premise in their data center today, what sort of advice would you give in terms of how to try this and what advantages could they see? If you look at like a time frame for 12 months into taking up something like VMware Cloud and AWS or another hyperscaler solution?
Yeah, so I mean, the first advantage comparing to building your own data center and putting VCD on top of vSphere and running this is in the cash flow and in the financials, right? So when you build your own data center, you need to make all these upfront investments. You have all the risk of your infrastructure not being utilized. You're not getting the return on your investment as you might have expected, right? Whereas with those hyperscale solutions like VMC, and then maybe layering solutions like Cloud Director Service on top, you're basically moving to an OpEx pay-as-you-go model yourself, right? So your cost portion is very aligned to what you're actually selling to your customers, meaning that your cash flow looks nicer and you don't have to make all these upfront investments. And that also then, reduces your risk, of course, because you can scale up and down as your customer demands grow or decrease.
And then there's, of course, the fact that if you've got VMware Cloud Foundation today in your data center, this is VMware Cloud Foundation in another data center, but effectively it's the same operations potentially that you're going to be, the same skill is going to be transferable to any one of those target architectures.
Exactly, yeah.
So John, you go for it, mate, go on.
Oh, I was just gonna add a couple things onto your initial question, and on top of Gerrit's answer. So the other two things that we find really resonating with cloud providers relative to the multi-cloud story and using the VCF stack and the various hyperscalers is around sort of speed and the stand-up of new infrastructure and services, and then also the way in which a cloud provider sort of allocates their technical expertise internally, right? So from the speed point of view, it's very easy in DR scenarios. If you have a large tenant coming on, you need additional infrastructure very rapidly. You sort of don't have to worry about the traditional procurement cycles, implementation details, and so on and so forth. As that, as cloud providers sort of take that on for their customers, they can now sort of realize that same efficiency when they look to VMware Cloud to expand their services. So that's really a big one where we see a lot of partners looking at how they can go faster, and then just the use in their technical and operations team in the sense of the rack and stack, the initial configuration, the lights out, just remote access, like the very fundamental building blocks you need to put in place just to deliver a service or add capacity to an existing pool. That's made much more streamlined. And the providers then can just focus on adding services and value to their customers as opposed to repetitively standing up infrastructure primitives.
Yeah, and I think that's a real shift in culture, isn't it? I mean, our service providers today, they kind of the ops guys, the techies, they're all focused on supporting and sustaining that infrastructure and growing that infrastructure. And now what we're asking them to do is actually, hey, pull back from that a little bit. Focus on the next level up, which is the services that are running on that infrastructure, because now the infrastructure is going to be run by someone else. I mean, there's still monitoring and reporting and obviously compliance and all that stuff that you need to do. But it's going to be, you're not going to have access to the underlying hardware. You can have some limits in the APIs that which you may have used before. They're not going to be there anymore, just from security reasons for us being a public cloud. So the ops is going to change a bit. But fundamentally, you need to start looking at that next level above the operations, which is helping your customers with the applications. Because if you go in there and try and resell, you're not going to make money. If you go in there as a managed services offering on top, you will make money.
Yeah, and one additional use case that I've seen with partners is that idea of global expansion and providing services to customers or parts of your customer's organization that you were basically unable to reach before, right? So I worked with one partner in the Middle East that was really great at hosting VCD-based workloads in their own data center in region, but they had customers actually operating large part of their business in the US, which would have not been feasible at all for the provider to stand up data centers and manage it in the US region. And that's then where, you know, those hyperscale solutions can provide an easy way to really take the business model that you have today in your region and expand it to other regions to serve your customers globally without all the heavy investments and the risk associated with expansion into foreign regions and countries as well.
Yeah, you raise a great point, and that's I remember speaking to providers years ago about this, about them using other at the time it was VCAN providers to kind of deliver services in different countries, and of course that was really difficult for them to negotiate and you know, get SLAs from, and eventually, you know, those sort of deals didn't really happen because it was just too hard to do and to manage across different contracts across different companies like that. Whereas now, like you say, you're signing that single MSP agreement, and then suddenly you're able to provision infrastructure in, what is it, 30, 40 countries globally. I can't remember the actual number, but it's a significant amount. And that's just from the VMware Cloud and AWS stack, let alone the other suppliers as well. But of course, everyone, you know, it's very, I'm not going to say easy. It's very convenient, let's say, to be able to, you know, click on one another host and boom, you have another host. But let's just think about the reality of that. The reality of, I think it's a 15-minute turnaround for hosts in VMware Cloud and AWS versus a 15-day, 15-month, you know, whatever it might be, get the CapEx approved, get it installed, get the security maintenance windows, firewall ports updated, everything else. I mean, that's where we talk about, you know, real operational time and expense is actually in all of those. That it's not even man hours, it's just it's lag, isn't it? It's the paper process that has to go through all those stages of change management within a provider.
Yeah, and on top of that, it's also the actual amount of hardware that you need to have on stock, or that you need to procure, right? I mean, if you're running your own data center operations, you need to account for, you know, load spikes, for updates, for hosts failing, right? For redundancy. All of that is not that big an issue if you're consuming this as a cloud service, where basically you can just add and rehost literally in minutes, right?
Yeah.
Specifically on those pandemic times, right, that we are facing right now, it's even worse, right? But having a solution, you know, and combining basically the best of both worlds where you can scale up as needed, right? I think is key to success also.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for a second, because there's some interesting dichotomies here, right? I mean, we can have the scale up of hosts, which is your kind of your cloud model for private clouds with AWS at a host barrier, VMC on AWS, and the host being that, I guess, that tenancy cutoff point where each customer is going to be physically assigned to each alternative hosts. And then you now have Cloud Director Service in VMware Cloud and AWS, which provides multi-tenancy to those hosts, to Gerrit's point, right? That utilization of resource pools and allocation models that guarantees performance or guarantees resource allocation. Again, for a service provider who's not kind of used to that, this is more thinking about your cloud as the service tiers within that cloud. You know, many providers I speak to like the idea of Cloud Director, but they can't get their heads around how that would change and how to offer that. And I think this is one of the kind of really hard things for providers to work out, is moving to VMware Cloud and AWS, I can do a host model, but then I'm going to end up with either underutilized or overutilized hosts. Very rarely am I going to get it absolutely perfect. And of course, as a cloud provider, I want to sweat the assets. I want to get as much money as I can by delivering a sustainable service on the minimal amount of hardware or cost outlay to me. And that's where Cloud Direct Service makes a huge difference. But let's kind of think also about, and you know, Robert, we got you on, so it's great being able to get these hosts in 15 minutes in VMware Cloud and AWS, or whatever the turnaround is in the other hyperscalers. I'm sure it's very quick. The reality is I've got to bring customer workloads to that environment. Now, we mentioned HCX at the start. What is HCX all about? Can you give us a kind of overview on the product itself and how you see service providers using this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, HCX, the naming is basically hybrid cloud extension, what is giving us a true hybridity in this multi-cloud world, right? By giving us possibilities to actually interconnect the different environments that I have and building kind of a service mesh in between, either from on-prem to the cloud or in between multiple clouds, right? Doesn't matter at the end of the day if it's VMC, if it's Azure VMware Solutions or Google Cloud VMware Engine. I can build basically a true hybridity between all of those clouds by leveraging HCX as an appliance that lives in all the different clouds. And HCX is creating a layer 2 extension, or can create a layer 2 extension in between all of those clouds. It gives us ability to migrating workloads in in a live vMotion context, in bigger chunks where I have application that has dependencies, let's say 70 or 100 different VMs or a whole VLAN, right, that I can basically take and migrate. So I have different ways on migrating. So at the end of the day, HCX is kind of a migration tooling for building a true hybridity between those different clouds.
Yeah, and it's got some really key advantages, not just the kind of the fact it links all these clouds up, but layer 2. So the interconnect being layer 2 means that this all appears as one large LAN. Tell me, how does the routing take place? And you hit on a really core point. The application dependencies. What's going in, what's going out, and mapping that is a service nightmare, which many service integrators spend months, if not years, doing for customers. And you're always going to miss something. So how does HCX? How does HCX de-risk migration for me?
Yeah, exactly. So in HCX, we're using the concept of different appliances, and each appliance has basically their own task, right? And there is a network extension appliance that is responsible for extending my existing network. Let's say I'm coming from on-prem or I'm coming from VMC to another target site that I would like to extend the network to, right? And what it does is the default gateway itself will stay on this source side, right? And it extends the network to the other network extension appliance that lives on the target side. But my gateway will always stay basically in my source side. So if I take a workload and migrate it over, right? Let's say I have a 2-tier application and I split it out, the database layer will be migrated, let's say, to Azure, but my front end sits still in VMC. They can still connect to each other and talk to each other because the default gateway for both VMs are the same, right? And everything happens basically via the HCX network extension layer. And HCX is handling all the routing and all this stuff for me. So I don't have to, take care of routing, like who can talk to whom. HCX is basically doing all of this for me. And I can select exactly which network I want to stretch to another site. So let's say I have an application stack of, different, let's say 100 VMs that all are basically, working together. And I miss maybe one piece, right? So I'm migrating all of them over.
Yeah.
They can still talk to each other, right? And then I can still bring this last piece over because of the magic of HCX, where we might, creating this layer 2 extension between two worlds.
So it kind of removes the problem of application dependencies. Effectively, that LAN becomes a stretched LAN over into a different data center, but your applications could still reach back and still reach forward. So in terms of what's going in and out of the original LAN, doesn't matter. It's still there.
I mean, there is still like a caveat to it, right? It depends a little bit on the latency on all those pieces, right? If I diverse an application, they have latency dependencies, it wouldn't make sense. But overall, you're totally right. Like the underlying networking stuff, that's where, this gets out of the game, right? And we don't care about this anymore. HCX is doing all the magic for me. It's all the routing, everything is happening within HCX.
And so that's one of perhaps the biggest problems with migration, is understanding what is the estate today and how can I take it to a target cloud tomorrow. If you want to do the redesign and refactor, then hey, that's no problem. That's 6 months worth of work. But if you want to I want to shut down my cage today, I need to shut it down in the next couple of weeks, and I need to move it into VMC on AWS. This is then going to enable you to do that.
Absolutely. And I think this is like one of the biggest challenges our customers and partners are struggling, right? Where co-location releases and or hardware refreshes in front of them, even like software refresh, right, of the underlying vSphere environment whatsoever, right? You can always use this SDDC that runs or this cloud foundation stack that runs in the cloud as a swing data center where you quickly migrate stuff over, right? You're upgrading, you're building your new data center whatsoever, creating a new service mesh to this new data center, extending your network, bring it back, right? So you have the complete freedom of choice for your workloads, where to run them, right? What's the best for you and your customers at the end of the day. It doesn't need to be in VMC or in Azure or in Google, because they may want to have also access to native services, right, in those respective clouds. So it really like gives you this freedom to decide where to go with your application.
And if you were looking at that next wave of solutions that's coming on, we've talked about hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, talked about hybrid cloud. We're now talking actually about potentially hybrid applications. So if the latency is not a problem, the connectivity is there, like you say, you can use some native, global load balancing services in AWS. You could then use some SQL database services in Azure and some, whatever you want to glue that application together, potentially having the right cloud deliver the right solution, but HCX be the glue in between.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and there, HCX does also have different ways on migrating things, right? I mentioned this in the beginning, is you can either do like a live migration, right, for, let's say, smaller workloads, where the people not even noticing, right, like moving from one hyperscaler to another without any interruption, non-disruptive, nothing happened basically, but you're living now in Azure and can enrich this application with, let's say, Azure services, or using bulk migration, right? As said also, where we, you can collect multiple virtual machines, multiple application workload layers, and then migrate them with a preceding into another, target side, into another hyperscaler, and then do the switch over, let's say on a weekend, in a specific maintenance window, but you have this preceding of the data already, and then the switch over, we call this basically low downtime migration, where you only like shutting down the application on the source side and switching it over on the target side, powering on. And then you have the best of both together, called replication assistant vMotion, where we, as said, best of both worlds, as we do a preceding, but the last bits, let's say on a weekend in a specific maintenance window where the IO hit on a database is not that big, we do the switch over live, right? So it's combining the best of two worlds.
Okay, and before we go any further into that, I just want to rewind a little bit. So one of the realities of service providers is they're taking on customers who have been outsourced to multiple service providers before. What is the install for HCX look like at sort of the source side? And can that be something that you could utilize into another service provider's environment to bring that customer out of that service provider into, wherever you're aggregating all the workloads into?
Yeah, I mean, that's also one thing that is a part of HCX, is how it was designed, is always to support customers to bringing from their actual state where they are, right, to, let's say, the target, say, where they want to be. And this could be, back to vSphere 6.x, right? So if you have an old infrastructure, or you coming from an old infrastructure, you can certainly go into the future state, let's say into VMC on AWS or wherever that runs maybe on newer versions, right? And you're still able to migrate between those environments.
Yeah, that's one huge plus. What I'm actually asking though is if you're a customer today, and I'm with cloud provider A, and I want to move to cloud provider B, can that cloud provider provide the HCX service to me on premise and into cloud provider A to pull those workloads out? How interruptive is that install in cloud provider A? Is it something they would have to work with the cloud provider on, or is this something they can do without the cloud provider really knowing or caring?
No, I think like from a technology perspective, HCX is definitely able to do that. From a cloud provider to cloud provider talk, because they need to have access, to the other infrastructure to get this all set up, right? We are building a site pairing between those two HCX connectors, and for this, one cloud provider needs to have access to the other cloud provider side to basically deploy an HCX environment or get access to the HCX environment on the other side. So I think it's really like a discussion then between the cloud providers and politics that will come to the game, right? And but from a technology perspective, it's always the same, right? If I'm coming from one cloud provider to another, or from on-prem to somewhere, from cloud to cloud, whatever. But on top of this, there is, caveats to it between those different cloud providers.
You want to say something there?
Yeah, you're still raising a super important point here, Guy, and that's really in regards to, when we look at migrating workloads to the cloud, we tend to look at, okay, how do we onboard to the cloud and how do we maybe modernize from there? But it's just as important to think about an exit strategy, right? And Martin Hoskin, our chief technologist, has a super good article on cloud exit strategies. So when you make a decision on where to move your workloads, you want to look at the whole life cycle of that application, and make a discussion based on the costs associated with that entire life cycle. And with HCX, in combination with all those VMware hyperscale solutions, you always have an easygoing exit strategy, because you can easily migrate into any given vSphere-based cloud, but you can also exit out of that with the same tool and the same kind of processes, which otherwise is pretty hard, right? So moving from native AWS EC2 to Azure VMs, not as easy as building this on VMware Cloud altogether between those different clouds.
Oh yeah, and I think there's the application kind of, you're moving from a completely different stack to another completely different stack. So the advice being, when customers are looking to have or looking to move to a service provider, interoperability is a key, or should be a key requirement for workload mobility, especially in sovereign cloud environments where you want the option to be able to take your workload out of that cloud vendor and put it in another cloud vendor, potentially, and you've got to have minimum downtime, minimum business impact from doing that. It should be something that people are kind of asking their cloud provider for, and certainly HCX, Robert, seems to be the technology to deliver that. So you mentioned live migration. You mentioned old vSphere estates and being able to go back in time, which a lot of places will be fairly back in time. When you go from when you go to a service provider environment, you migrate from on-prem to a service provider, there's often some staging involved. What does HCX do in terms of that? If I'm moving from a vSphere 6.x environment to my shiny service provider instance of 7.x, what does HCX do actually to the VM in terms of the VMware tools and things like that? What actually happens in that? Do I need to stage it, or is this something that gets done automatically?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is one other feature that HCX is providing, per VM EVC mode. So typically, if you're moving, towards a new environment, and you do kind of a cold migration whatsoever, your VMware tools get either upgraded or you get a new hardware version, and you maybe have new CPUs, so whatsoever, with new features in it. So you will not be able to migrate this afterwards back, right? Because this VM gets all these features from the new shiny world, but sometimes you may need to migrate back. Specifically, we see that with many customers, where they try things out, or maybe using this as a development environment whatsoever, but actually want to bring this stuff back once it goes production and so, right? So as said, HCX has this per VM EVC mode where you can set a specific, where you don't need to take care, let's say like this, for on the cluster state itself, but rather on the VM level, you can specify things and migrate it over as needed and bring it back, right? So I think this is like the huge thing is one direction, okay, but bi-directionally, this is like the golden nugget, right? Like bring it wherever you want in between versioning. I think this is something where we see partners and customers are really struggling so far.
I mean, from my perspective, I think what HCX is offering is the multi-cloud, I'm going to call it the multi-cloud glue, the multi-cloud highway, if you like. It is offering ultra-fast migration and layer 2 connectivity. I mean, Robert, we've only spoken about it in terms of migration, but actually, in terms of connectivity, that migration can take as long as you want, right? Are you allowed to keep that layer 2 up and Is there any limit on it?
It depends on, like how big your, let's say, network on-premise is and what you want to achieve at the end of the day. But no, there is no, let's say, limit from a VMware perspective for the technology itself. Again, It depends on the application level. Is there latency, that you need to take care of? But from a technology perspective, you always can have this open running and work with it. And HCX, I think, brings also another feature to the table that is getting missed sometimes is the WAN optimization, right? So there is something in between that is actually optimizing the vMotion itself by doing deduplication and compression, by splitting the traffic into, let's say, smaller chunks instead of having one big elephant running, at the vMotion via the bandwidth, but rather having multiple chunks of the app itself running via the bandwidth and going to the target side. And this actually reduces the amount of bandwidth that I need for a vMotion. So typically, there is a 250 meg requirement for doing live migrations. With HCX in place, you can actually bring this down to 100 meg, right? So still we are recommending using direct connects and interconnects and express route, but like the minimum requirement for HCX doing actually migration is 100 meg. What is amazing, right? If you think of migrating, let's say, from AWS Oregon on the west side of US to Azure VMware solutions on the east side of US, 4,000 kilometers in between, and you just hit the migrate button, and it goes all over this 100 meg line, right, without interruption. And I think this is really interesting and amazing what HCX does in the underlying technology itself.
Yeah, what's the compression tech that's used in the appliance then? Is it Silverline, Silverlight, something like that?
Silver Lake, Silverline.
Silverline, I can't remember. Gerrit?
Silver Peak?
Silver Peak. Silver Peak. Silver Peak. Yeah.
I can't remember exactly. I think this is the optimization technology.
Yeah. So summary there is you're getting deduplication, WAN optimization inclusive in the solution, which is, like you say, going to bring down your bandwidth requirement. You still have to be cognizant of latency, but it will reduce the bandwidth requirement. And that's, if I'm a service provider deploying HCX, and we'll go for this in a minute, Robert, hopefully we'll see in the demo how you would go about deploying this. But this appliance is coming with all of that packaged up already. I mean, I'm not having to kind of then order different WAN optimization software appliances or anything like that. Is all a part of the HCX delivery.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can basically pick and choose when rolling out HCX, the service mesh, what kind of features you want to have, right? Do you need WAN optimization or not? Maybe you have enough bandwidth, so you don't need that part. So you can really pick and choose what kind of features you want to see within HCX. Do you need replication assistant vMotion or not? You want to do all bulk, whatsoever, right? So you have different ways at the end of the day on how to roll this out.
Yeah, so one of the things, John, maybe to you, we've got various self-service and various kind of managed service capabilities here. If it's from or considering shared vCenter environments as the source service provider on-prem, this is obviously going to be like a managed service for them. What are some of the use cases you've seen with service providers looking to deploy this? Is this more of a managed service or a self-service in your view?
With respect to HCX and the movement of workloads from their environment to a VMware Cloud and a hyperscaler.
Yeah.
So I think this at least today, right, based on the conversations I have, I think this falls into a managed service, right? You see a lot of this today with various tool sets where providers will help both bring workloads into their environment, fan them out to multiple sites, and it's inclusive of a managed service that they provide to their tenants. We are seeing this fall into the same sort of bucket around migration monetization, whether it's a PS one-time service or long-term I'm going to move them and then manage and monitor and so on and so forth. So I see it really resonate from a managed services, like real monetization point of view that extends from getting them into the environment and then also sort of scaling and growing into other environments as well, whether it's at the directive of the tenant, the end customer, or the provider saying, hey, we if they're using VMC on AWS, maybe they have 2 new regions now. To Gerrit's point earlier, they now have the ability for global scale. So they add additional regions and sites for their tenants to take advantage of. So I think given all of that, right, it sort of falls into that ongoing managed service just for application and workload sort of lifecycle management. Yeah.
So I'm just trying to think where this is like really, where's the sweet spot for HCX? It's obviously if you've got VMware Cloud and AWS, you're getting HCX already as a service provider or as a customer, it's inclusive. So there your customer with perhaps large data sets on premise, complicated application environments, multi-tier applications. This is going to be perfect for that. As long as you got the kind of the bandwidth and latency is right, you should be good. Equally, if you're moving into a Cloud Director environment, now this is where there is a little bit extra work to do, which makes it a full managed service, which is you have to then import in Cloud Director. Is that right, Robert?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, as you said, right, the speed spot is really like this whole workload portability, to achieve workload portability, either direction that you decide is the best, for your customer.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, well, Robert, let's have a little look around. You got anything you can show us?
Yeah, so maybe starting with like kind of an, set the scene on what we have so far. In our lab environment, just to understand what are we using here, right? Yeah, so what you see here is basically our multi-cloud lab environment that we are using, to create new IP, to really do customer demos and stuff like this. So we have on the left side is basically our on-premise environment that lives in a Rackspace data center. We have a VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC. We have a Google Cloud VMware Engine SDDC, and we have an Azure VMware Solutions within Azure as a target site. And they all basically interconnected via Megaport. So we have a direct connect to VMC, we have a interconnect to GCV, and an express route to AVS. And on top of this is basically in all the different solutions, we have HCX. And HCX, as said, is the glue between all of them. So we have a layer 2 stretch, that goes from VMC to GCVE, from VMC to AVS, and vice versa. So you really have this, full-blown workload portability options where you can, migrate your workloads wherever you want at the end of the day. So this is more or less just to set the scene. And what we're going to do in this demo is we have a workload that was deployed, let's say via, vRealize, or you name it. You maybe have an existing workload, and we're going to migrate this workload that is basically a 2-tier application with a front end and a back end. And we're going to migrate this from VMC on AWS to Azure VMware Solutions without downtime, live with interactions on the front end itself. As said, it's a 2-tier application. We have a front end and we have a database. The front end is very easy, lightweight, stateless application, basically, and then the stateful data is in the database itself. We have this specific network that's called T2 Network VMworld that sits on this IP address. And this specific network is basically extended with the help of HCX, that is the glue to Azure, right? So coming from VMC on AWS to Azure, and we have this network that is extended between those two worlds. And we're going to move basically one of the layers to the east side of US. So basically going from west side to east side, just to set the scene, okay?
Okay.
Any questions on this? Otherwise, I would like to switch over to my browser and share with you the environments that we have. So as said, we're going from VMC on AWS to Azure VMware Solution. Just as a proof point, we can see that I have already run an SDDC within VMware Cloud on AWS, runs on i3 Metal instance type from AWS itself. And we also have an Azure VMware Solutions SDDC that as said, sits on the East Coast of US and runs within Azure, right? So those are the two SDDCs basically that I have up and running. And what you will notice is, of course, there is, not a big of differentiator. It's always the same cloud foundation stack that we're using. And this gives us, at the end of the day, this full workload portability. Okay, so going into HCX on the VMware Cloud on AWS side, what you will see, or what I can share with you, is basically the side pairing, similar to the slide deck that you have seen. You will basically see how we interacted or interconnecting all the different environments that we have, right? I mean, it's either on this easy map. We have Google down here in Los Angeles, we have VMware Cloud on AWS in Oregon, and then we have Azure VMware solution that sits on the east side of US. As said also in the beginning is, even though HCX is running everywhere, you need to build this side pairing. So all the HCX managers that we have are basically connected to each other from each side, right? So that's basically the first step that needs to be done, is creating a side pairing. Let's say you're rolling out HCX for the first time in VMC or in AVS, you need to have basically HCX on both sides to create a side pairing, right?
Hey, Robert, just from what's the kind of compute footprint from the HCX standpoint, from this appliance that's delivering this functionality, and where does it have to live? Does it live in the management domain or the compute domain?
Yeah, so on the VMC side, it is in the management resource pool. Basically, you don't have access, to change it. On the AVS side, it's similar. It is basically a service that Microsoft is providing. You don't have access, to change anything in it or something like that. But it's always the same pair of appliances that you will need. You have the HCX manager, HCX manager on both sides. You have the network extension appliance on both sides. You have the interconnect appliance on both sides, and then you either decide to have one optimization or not. But it's always a pair of appliances basically sitting on both sides. Okay, but it's fully managed at the end of the day from the provider where you run it. If we look into the on-premise world, this is a little bit different. You basically need to go ahead and deploy this, with your partner or on your own, but you are responsible for the HCX part, basically on the on-premise world. Okay, this makes sense.
So just the deployment of this is automatic. I guess if it's deployed from. Where would it be deployed from? So let me rewind. Is it Cloud Partner Navigator that would kind of deliver this service?
Yeah, so from a VMC on the AWS perspective, I only have an customer environment, basically, or customer looks like environment. You have a tab where you basically say activate, right? And then it's going to get rolled out completely. You get a link where you can download basically the on-premise appliance. You go ahead, deploy this, and it looks similar to cloud providers, right? So is fully automated at the end of the day, similar to AVS. They will deploy that for you on the AVS side, right?
Right.
So if I'm a VCP provider and I want to use this on my side, I need to deploy this myself, whereas in the hyperscale solution, it's managed and deployed for me, right?
Yeah, I'm just trying to also understand, but this will be taking away from my overall compute capacity if I select to deploy it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like HCX, again, you have those multiple appliances.
Yeah.
They live somewhere, right?
Yeah.
They will consume resources, and this will, get out of your all over existing capacity, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Similar to our NSX appliances, vCenter that lives on top of this SDDC, right?
Yeah.
There's management resources that needs to be there.
Yeah, I'm looking at this from again trying to find that sweet spot. So if you're investing in infrastructure, you're investing in a customer who's got these complicated large data sets, then having a certain chunk of your compute assigned to that customer for HCX is not going to be a problem, because they're going to be paying a premium for this service. Yeah,
exactly. And in VMC on AWS, it looks very, very easy, right? You just go on the add-ons tabs. And sorry, this is in German. I don't know why Firefox is doing that always to me. So, and you basically hit the activate button that is down here. In our case, it is already installed, right? It's already activated. You hit the button, everything happens in the background, and then you can basically do the same in your on-premise world, right? So in our case, we already have HCX rolled out on VMC. We have HCX rolled out on Azure VMware Solutions, and they both interconnected. And you can even see that we have, interconnects from VMC to Google, for example, to our GCV environment, right? There is a side pairing, as you can see, from Oregon to Los Angeles. And the same way we have VMC to Azure VMware Solutions that we have seen in Washington. Okay.
And that one that's second from the top is an arrow going one way. Is that indicating a one-way direction?
Yeah, so it is basically not a one-way direction, but on the migration tab, and we will see that later, is you have to basically hit the reverse migration button then, so that you can basically migrate it back. So you would not be able, so when I migrate from here to VMC, and then want to bring this workload back, I also need to get to this HCX manager, hit the reverse migration button and bring it back. But this is just the way how we deployed this, to showcase the different possibilities that you have as a partner or customer, right?
Yeah.
So in this case, for example, let's say here, we established the side pairing from the VMC side to GCVE. Then you switch over to the GCVE side to HCX and establish a side pairing to VMC. And with this, you have a full bidirectional migration way without, the need to go to a specific environment, hit the reverse migration button and bring this workload back. You really have the freedom of choice to migrate wherever you want.
Got it.
Okay. And then once the side pairing is actually up and running, you go ahead and roll out so-called service mesh, where you're basically rolling out this number of appliances, that I mentioned before, the interconnect appliance, the network extension appliance. You're rolling out the WAN optimization feature in both worlds, right? So when you create a service mesh, you basically have the option to select your, what is the source side. In this case, it's VMC, and then you selecting what is your target side. Let's say it's AVS, right? You go ahead, you select the existing resource pool, right? The compute profile, the resource pool within VMC. You're selecting the same on the AVS side, and then you already see that there is a management resource pool where this gets rolled out to, and on the AVS side in this specific cluster, you have the piece that I mentioned before, where you can select specific features that you want to have within HCX or not. Like for example, here we have replication assistant grayed out. I think it's waiting for an update on the HCX side itself. You can either select bulk migration or not, right? If you don't need it, why should you deploy this? And it will just extend the possibilities at the end of the day. So it's really easy, walkthrough through this workflow. And then once you at the end of you hit the deploy button and roll out actually the service mesh with the different appliances in it. As said, we have a service mesh IX, what is the interconnect appliance that builds is a tunnel between those two worlds. You have the WAN optimization and the network extension appliance that is responsible at the end of the day for building up this layer 2 stretch between those two worlds. And I think this is also one feature that, or one question that I'm getting asked a lot from customers and partners is if I have an on-premise environment, let's say that, where I don't have the cloud foundation stack at all, do I really need in the first step, Cloud Foundation as a base platform to actually be able to use HCX? No, you don't need, right? You can start with any kind of stuff that you have on premise. It just needs to be vSphere, and then the network extension appliance still can, create this layer 2 stretch.
Correct.
Okay, so once this is up and running, the tunnel status is up, everything is there. You more or less, basically as a next step, need to decide which network you want to extend from one environment to the other environment, right? So where is your workload living at the moment, on which network? In our case, as shared on the slide decks, we have this Tito VMworld network that you have seen, and this is basically the one that is extended from, where you can see here, from VMC to AVS or vice versa, right? We have this specific network here, And once I extending a network, I select it basically, and I provide the gateway IP address. And with that, HCX knows exactly, what is the gateway IP address. So all the traffic that comes from this VM that sits on this layer 2 extension knows exactly where to go, where the gateway is, and then the routing happens right there.
And that's the proximity routing, is it? That takes over at that point?
You can basically enable the mobility optimized networking to, like, if you want to have a if you want to stay in the same environment and not need to go always on-prem or to your source side for the gateway to get out right into the internet, let's say, or something like that. You can you have this possibility to
I see.
enable this mobility optimized networking. In our case, in our scenario, it was always go back to basically to the gateway that sits on the source side to communicate with the other applications.
So Robert, just before you proceed, I just thinking in terms of service providers, I might have a lot of appliances out there in different customer on-prems in my data center. I saw there was a version there as well. And because this is a SaaS solution delivered by SaaS, how does this then manage interoperability and version control? So if I've got, like, I don't know, you guys roll out a new version, do the end appliances, do I get a warning saying they need to be updated, or do they automatically update? What? Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And this is
just noticed that.
Exactly. This is what we have right now. Is there is a pending software update, on the VMC side. I think what is also interesting is, like, if we go down here, I think it is system updates. You will see what kind of update is available. So, for example, in VMware Cloud on AWS, we are running at the moment on the HCX version 4.2.1.0. In Azure VMware Solutions, and I think in Google, we already did the update to 4.2.2. What is the pending update here, right? So on the VMC side, so I could, hit this button and basically say, okay, go ahead and do this update for me. But it's just something that you need to do at the end of the day. It's pretty straightforward. There's nothing magic.
Yeah. I think the local one's easier. It's more the remote ones I'd be sort of slightly concerned about if there was multiple versions in between the version that's current and the version I'm using. I'd want to understand how long that version on-prem is going to be valid for before I need to update it.
Yeah, I think that's something that where we need to look into basically into the different updates, and what is still possible and what not. I think it's -1 and -1, I think is the version that should work.
Okay.
Like in this example, right, we have one update less.
Yeah.
That we have in Google and AVS.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how long these connectors would stay in place, but if they're staying in place for a long time, I think it'd be important for a service provider to understand that they are going to have maintenance downtime while they're upgraded. And that they would have to schedule this.
Yeah, no, that's totally right. And I think there is certain work that needs to be done on the HCX side, right? I mean, again, and updates come in frequently through, and since this is this is the crucial piece for your workload portability, you need to make sure that this piece is up and running all the time, right? We have seen this several times with customers and partners. Where they haven't looked into it, let's say for 3 months, 6 months, whatsoever, right? And there was an urgent updates that needs to be done, and then the link or the interconnect, the site pairing is maybe even broken whatsoever, right? So that's definitely a work that needs to be done, is to have a look into this and have this up to date on the right sites. Yeah.
And I presume this is all managing itself in band, or is there out of band connectivity required to do updates?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
So this is all managing. If I've got a new appliance I need to update on a remote site, does it download through the existing connectivity, or does it rely on out of band connectivity to do that? Another way.
Yeah, so for HCX there is basically kind of a repository where all those things getting uploaded. But again, it depends on where you're using HCX. Is it coming from on-prem or from a cloud provider? Like from an on-prem environment, there is a requirement for you to open a specific port or have the possibility to speak to the HCX update repository, right?
Yeah, that's one.
To download the stuff. So if this is not allowed or is this blocked, you will not get any updates anything, right? So there is some prerequisite, let's say, that needs to be checked and needs to be worked on. Also, like opening up firewall, right? By deploying this on the VMC side or activating the service, this doesn't mean that you now can go ahead and create the site pairing. You need to open up the firewall basically, because when you deploy VMC first time, there is a deny all firewall rule, right? So no one can actually create a site pairing to your HCX manager, right? You need to open up different ports so that they can talk to each other, that HCX can go out, something can go in. So there is a little bit of stuff to do beforehand. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, so once basically, the network extension is done. So I have my Tito network in this specific case, because my application, also called Tito, is time traffic overview, what it stands for. Once this is done, I can basically go ahead and migrate stuff. So I would, go to this specific window here called migration. I can select my application. And as you can see, this is a lab environment. Let me go back here. You can see there are a lot of migration happening, right? So our whole team is using that. And just before this call, I was migrating an application from VMC to AVS. So what happens right now is that HCX is now basically checking all the target sites that are available, where the site pairing is available, that there is, I can reach the resources, I can, see the folders, the storage, the networking. So it's basically checking a one-time check, is everything available? And this is the button that I talked about, the reverse migration button, right? So if you have just one direction into, let's say, VMC from your on-premise side, you would not be able to go to your VMC HCX manager and migrate there. You would need to basically hit this reverse migration button to bring your workload back, right? But if you have bidirectional, it doesn't matter from where you come in, you can migrate into each side basically without using this reverse migration. So we want to go from VMC on AWS to AVS, Azure VMware Solution. So we're selecting our AVS vCenter in this case as a destination, right? And now I need to select my application that I would like to migrate. So I'm looking for my folder that I created beforehand called, I think it's Tito on VMC. I have two tiers, right? And I said, I want to migrate the database tier basically to the other side. I select my application. I could also select both, right, and migrate them as a full stack of an app. In this specific case, just migrating the database itself. I need to specify now a few things within this migration. So basically, what is my resource pool on the target side on AVS itself? I've created a resource pool called migration on the AVS side. I need to specify the folder on the destination side. In this case, I've created a folder called Tito on AVS, just for, I prepared that. And then I need to select my vSAN data store that is available on the AVS side. And this is what I'm talked also about beforehand, is I have different migration options. So either doing a live migration, doing bulk migration means I'm doing the preceding on the AVS side, or doing replication assistant vMotion. What is basically the best of both worlds is, on one hand, is replicating the data, doing a preceding on the AVS side, and then I have the possibility to define a switch over time and the date. Let's say I have a maintenance window on the weekend, specifically on big enterprise customers and cloud providers. I think this is a crucial point, that to have that integrated completely, where I select, let's say, on a Friday night or on Saturday whatsoever, and then HCX is taking care of this whole process, replicating and doing the switch over. In our case, I want to do a live migration of my application. So I select this, I can select the network. In this case, I'm migrating from VMC to AVS. So from my layer 2 stretch, so this VM lives already on a layer 2 stretch, to my initial network that is on the Azure side, the T2 network VM world. I can hit the validate button. In this process, basically HCX is going into the VM and checking that there is no ISO image mounted, and the network is actually available on the other side, things like that, and giving me error if it's, or the per VM EVC mode, if that works, and things like that, basically kind of pre-checks. If everything is fine, I can hit the go button, and this will kick off the migration. Right. So from the application perspective, once it starts, there is, for the end user itself, because this is a live migration, there is no disruption, or the user will not even notice that there is something happening. So as said, I have this T2 application. This is basically my front end that lives and will stay on VMware Cloud on AWS. I can completely work with this application, and all my requests that I'm putting in here in my time traffic overview. So let's say I'm going from Frankfurt. Gerrit, where you live in?
Hamburg.
Oh, this is far away, man.
That's a long commute.
A lot of commute time for me. But what it does is basically doing now, using the Google APIs, doing requests, how long would this take? And then calculating it up basically, for a week, you would have this much of commute time. For a month, you would have this much. And in a year, but I think the interesting piece is basically that now this request is basically stored in my database layer. So if I hit the DB dump button here, right, this will actually talk to my database and showcase me like what kind of requests I have done so far, right? So just, the last one is Frankfurt to Hamburg. During, while my database layer is actually migrating in the backend 4,000 kilometers to the other side of US, right? And again, the user, doesn't notice it at all, right? There is no disruption for the user at the end of the day. And I can go ahead, and click around and do things. I can completely work with this application as needed. All the pieces will get stored in a database layer. So if we go back, typically this kind of migration takes around 5 minutes for the database layer. Again, it depends on the bandwidth itself. And as you can see, I have done a lot of migrations. And the last time, even huge ones was, like 600 gigs of data. Yeah, so the migration just takes the time it takes, right? It's a very small application. If you have, of course, larger application, the longer it takes, right? And the boundary is the physics at the end.
Yeah.
Really depends, but as said, it takes around 5 minutes for this migration to happen.
And all the time you can carry on using the application. That's absolutely amazing. It's the coolest migration I've ever seen, really, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I'm still impressed. And I see that many times. We're talking about this with customers. Like, hey, we can do vMotion. Yeah, well, of course, but like, what kind of vMotion, right? Between 4,000 kilometers and 5 minutes for an app is very impressive still for many partners and customers. If I showcase this to them,
Yeah, long distance vMotion's been around for quite a while, but the complexities in getting it set up and actually working,
yep.
pretty. I remember there was a white paper done by the Cloud Practice some years ago on setting it up. It's a complicated thing, and basically you've done that all contained out of the box in a nice appliance with a SaaS UI that you can just point and click and drive. Incredible.
One of the use cases that providers also, leverage HCX for is internal migrations, right? So moving from a legacy platform to a new one, or consolidating different data centers into one. So this is not a customer-facing use case, but one where providers use this internally, right?
So the way this works I know we said we wouldn't touch on the commercials too much, but the way this works is if you've got VMware Cloud and AWS or any of the other hyperscalers, you get HCX. Is there any conditions around that? Obviously it's only to that target cloud, is that right?
So there's probably a couple nuances there. One is Enterprise is not part of the subscription. That is traditionally an add-on, right? I know it's different in VMC. If you look at the other hyperscalers, there is a separation of advanced as part of the subscription. Enterprise is sort of an add-on thereafter. There is the capability and the possibility for this to do cloud-to-cloud migrations. It's not just on-prem to one single cloud target, right? So that's a core part of it, but it very much is designed, can handle, and does cloud-to-cloud migrations, which we've done in the lab. We've worked with the BU on. Customers are doing it. So that is very much a core tenet of it, Guy. It's like anything, right? Based on sort of what the customers are trying to do, what the tenants are trying to accomplish, and the footprint of the provider for this conversation. But yeah, cloud-to-cloud is very much a thing.
Yeah, and just one other thing, I was just wondering what is in the enterprise versus the advanced, and one of the things I see that's available for cloud providers is non-VMware to VMware migrations, and that's a pretty big use case for a lot of cloud providers who are coming with customers who've got Hyper-V and all sorts of other stuff in their environments.
Yeah, I think like migrating from KVM, Hyper-V, as you said, right, to vSphere is definitely a huge thing, and it is very complicated, right? I just have I jumped off a customer meeting where they have a big application running on KVM. They said like, well, show us how this could work, and yeah, I mean HCX is really powerful on this specific case too.
Yeah, and we haven't dived into any of the other use cases in too much detail. I mean, there's obviously the extension which we're seeing live, but there is obviously the service extension, and there's disaster recovery. So I guess we'll cover that off perhaps in another session, because that's probably worthwhile doing its own session on that.
Yeah, and the migration is just finishing up basically. So yeah, what we can see already, like the T2 on AVS folder was empty beforehand, and we have our database layer now in here on Azure VMware Solutions. So we don't have it anymore on the VMC side. So if I look into this folder, the migration is complete. In this case, it took 7 minutes. I go back into my VMC folder, and I will see basically that there is now just the front end in this T2 on VMC folder, right? So I have my front end living in Oregon, and my database living now on the east side of US in Azure VMware Solution and AWS, right? And they can still like communicate to each other without any issues. I have access to my database, as said. I just did a new request from Frankfurt to Munich, how long this takes, and written down into my database, and I can access it and work with the application as it is. Yeah.
It's a beautiful multi-cloud thing. It really is. And seeing that live is fantastic. Thank you, Robert, for showing us that. I really appreciate you pulling out the VMworld demo to walk us through it. Yeah, that is pretty impressive. Gentlemen, thank you very much again. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Guy.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.